Welcome back to Beer Time with Books.
Woo! Woo!
I've now made it an absolute effort to just say it off the bat because we had we've talked about it in other episodes, like a multi-episode streak of not saying the podcast title.
Not announcing the name?
Yeah.
Oh.
So.
Apologies.
Beer
followers.
Time with Books is back. And it's just the OG 3 again.
We're here.
That's true.
Our guest last week, who joined us for last episode, who joined us for the
This
Underground
podcast
Railroad.
Transcends time and space.
In our time, this audience back on Earth. Yeah, Emily isn't with us this time, but those were a couple good episodes.
She's
and
no longer with
That's what I
us.
thought you were going to say. Emily
like
is
she
sadly no
died.
longer with us.
She's still fine.
So that was
Emily's alive.
our eulogy corner, a new segment. Hey, it's Halloween. It's thematic.
Eulogy corner. It's not
E-
Halloween.
Emily's still here. Yeah, we did miss our holiday episode tendency. We could have done it on Halloween to keep up with the 50% of our episodes that have fallen on real holidays. But yeah, Halloween was 2 days ago. We're about to get an extra hour. So we're using our extra hour for daylight savings time to do this podcast.
Brian has been saying that about everything we've done. He's like, this is how we're going to use our
This is
extra
how we're
hour.
using
Ryan
our-
also told me that this is his favorite holiday.
Yeah, that's true.
It's great. You can't beat it.
Sleep.
That's very on brand for you.
That's not. Well, no, okay, using an extra hour, but not
Using
sleeping.
an
Yeah,
extra,
I don't use
that's
it-
what I meant.
yeah, I don't use it
Using an
to
extra
sleep.
hour to not sleep
Just do more things.
is on brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Must do at all times.
Well, I'm committing to it. This extra hour is getting used for this podcast.
Is this the hour?
This is the hour.
This is,
ex-
yeah,
it's
this is
now.
the one.
So-
I wasn't consulted.
So happy daylight savings time, OG3.
Thanks.
I'm going to use my extra hour to sleep. So,
Yeah. Also, that's on brand.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Speaking of sleep, I fell asleep while reading Northwest.
that's not the full review. Just a
Is that a reflection of the quality of the book?
No.
yes, but that is what we're talking about today, Northwest. But before we jump into that and moving past the eulogy corner, we're gonna get into our other classic corners of what are you drinking? And since this is Danny's episode, we're gonna start with her.
Hey, it's Danny. I'm drinking a blood orange something. Oh, blood and honey American ale.
ASMR slipping off.
Oh,
the
did you hear that?
koozie. Yeah.
Sorry.
Just-
A blood and honey American ale from Revolver Brewing. It's good.
was pretty good. This is it's not a total sour ale, but it's like in a similar vein to a sour ale.
Yeah, it's like blood orangey, but not juicy.
And it's so interesting that this is the season of the sour ale.
The season of sour ale, are you calling it?
It is the kind
And
of.
The fall is when
Yeah,
they
it's
do
kind of
sour.
soury.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know that about sour.
So yeah, you're seasonal over here.
Feeling spooky.
So yeah, this is Brian bringing in a classic that's been on the show multiple times. Got to get that ASMR. This is the Boulevard Tank 7. Ready to have a good time. Jamie luckily still has her beer, and we're going to pass it over to her.
Just spilled it. I've had a bad day. I also broke a bowl this morning. So, I'm drinking Boulevard Brewing Space Camper, which is a cosmic IPA. I don't know what a cosmic IPA is, but
I think we've had that on the show
I think
as well.
so as well. I like Space Camper. It's good.
And that'll be brought up during the season finale, which this was talked off the mics, not to you. Maybe a giveaway in the last episode of one of the books that we've been
Oh, yeah, we
reviewing.
talked about that.
Yeah.
What?
For the
You
last
weren't
episode,
involved in
potentially
this
a giveaway
conversation.
for anybody that's listening. We can do a giveaway for a podcast listener for one of the books
Oh,
that we've
send a
talked about.
book?
Yeah.
Okay, for
Or-
all of our loyal listeners?
Yeah. So we'll
Guys, we know you're out there.
we'll see how it goes, but just to kind of tease that couple episodes in advance, we'll maybe come up with the rules for that giveaway next episode, and then have it in the comments section of the last episode to have a giveaway. I think that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah.
If any of you are curious to try one of the books, I don't know if you've listened to the episode having not read it, but maybe you have. Some people like to really get that full analysis before diving into those books.
I like to do that.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, we're going to move on to the next section here on some recent media we've been consuming.
I've been listening to a new true crime podcast called Cold, and it's interesting. It follows one story about a missing woman in Utah, and I'm 7 episodes in, and all signs are pointing to the husband because he sounds like a psychopath, but we'll see. Apparently it's a cold case, so I don't really know how it's cold, but it's good. I'm all caught up on My Favorite Murder, so I needed some more true crime to listen to. I've been doing that. I'm also reading Name of the Wind, thanks to Jamie. I started it last year. It took a long hiatus, and now I'm back into it.
Was it talked about on the show?
Probably.
Nice.
Probably early.
Nice.
But I'm like on an actual roll with it now.
That's so exciting.
Making a return.
I'm also reading One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I recently read The Intuitionists by Colson Whitehead. Staying on author brand.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend The Intuitionists. It's a little kooky, but it's good. That's all.
That's the blurb.
Kooky but good.
Yeah. Colson Whitehead's books have had a particular brand of short blurbs.
I told
Kooky,
Brian that
but nice.
It like felt similar to the Underground Railroad because it felt. I mean, it's a very. I mean, it takes place in real time in like the real world, but there's one very big obvious element that is not a thing. Like it's not real, like in the Underground Railroad. So I thought it was interesting how he kind of continued that theme. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Nice.
James?
Me.
Oh, sorry, you were looking expectant.
I don't know. I can go next.
That'd be out of order, but yeah, that's fine.
Is that fine?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I've been listening to a new podcast that is new.
Whoa.
Is that the blurb?
Whoa.
We're really killing it with the blurb.
New
tonight.
podcast
Very new.
is new.
Love it. New. Great.
I mean that in that like it's like a mini series and only 2 episodes are out. So that's what I mean. But it's called Finding Fred and it's about Mr. Rogers.
He is killing it these days.
He really is. And honestly, like there
Fred.
hasn't been anything mind-blowing in the 2 episodes that I've listened to. It feels very similar to the documentary that came out about him a few years ago. But
Great documentary.
But
Won't You Be My Neighbor, right? Just so we make sure.
Yeah, Won't You Be My Neighbor, I think is the documentary. Even without that, I just hearing about Fred Rogers, I think has given me a little bit of hope in the world at a time when I think I really needed it. So I've been listening to that in the mornings and it makes me feel happy. I started listening to it because a writer that I follow on all social media is in the first episode. She's like interviewed about her experiences listening to Mr. Rogers and watching him and doing things. Ashley C. Ford, who I love very, very much. So she's on the first episode, but it's not her podcast. But I like it so far. 2 episodes. I've also been listening to an audiobook, A Man Called Uva, which I
love that book.
thought was a man called Ove. But
I also did, and I've read it.
the audiobook disagrees. So, Uva.
Isn't it like Dutch or something?
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I don't know. I'm only like 5 chapters in.
It's lovely. I love that book.
I saw that you rated it well on Goodreads, but I've been listening to the audiobook. I've listened to like maybe an hour of it, and I think it's like 7 hours or something. But I like it so far. Anything else? Am I doing anything else?
Watching?
We watched the finale of the Great British Baking Show today.
Oh. You can't talk about it.
No, we won't talk about it.
Okay.
All we'll say, and this won't spoil the actual events of it, but the end montage of like where the bakers are now made us laugh out loud.
Yeah, it was really funny.
Okay.
Fantastic.
I will watch it tomorrow.
For
that
two
you
reasons.
notice
Yeah, you may
why.
notice why.
I hope you notice why. We thought it was really funny.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Oh my god. We literally like, I don't know. It was great.
I'm so excited. I'll watch it tomorrow
one
night.
One of them for a positive reason, and one of them because it confirms every bias that we had during the show. That's all we'll say.
Stop. I can't
That's
deal.
all we'll say.
Okay.
So, anyway, yeah, it was a good finale.
Brian?
As far as books, I am in the middle of Jack Kerouac's Book of Blues poetry collection. Not amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's
I
fine.
didn't know
Our
you had started
reviews
it.
have been
Yeah.
so good. New,
Weren't.
not amazing. What was mine? Great.
Oh,
Kooky, but good.
Yeah,
Good.
kooky but good.
Man.
Yeah, I like the concept of the poetry book because he does it in such a way that it's explained that it's supposed to be like a song. Like each one is a different chorus or something, and it has to do around. I mean, it deals with certain subject matters, but I just don't know that. Maybe that's Jack Kerouac's forte, is poetry particularly.
Do you like poetry?
That's the other thing. I'm just reading it because I wanted to read another Kerouac. It was kind of short, and I needed to get back into a good groove on some books. But I feel like, yeah, I could definitely enjoy it more if I liked poetry more.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, have you read any other?
But that's why
books
I'm
of
glad.
poetry?
That's why I'm glad to read it though, because
Yeah.
it's
No, it's
helping
good.
read more. So yeah, that's been good. As far as video games, there's a new one out called The Outer Worlds, which is a great RPG. There's been a lot of watered down RPGs where the stats that you invest into your character don't matter. On this one, I'm like a smooth talking kind of guy, so I've bumped all of my conversation stats, and it made a difference in the game, and I enjoy that a lot. It's basically like Fallout in space. For anybody that knows the Fallout universe, you guys do because we played that board game.
We didn't. I'm sorry. We didn't play that game. We started.
We started that game.
We started it.
But yeah, it's like Fallout in space. It's from the original creators of Fallout. They don't carry this series anymore. That's Bethesda, but Obsidian is the one that makes the game, and it's amazing. I think the writing is great. The decisions you make a difference. So highly recommended on that. There's been a lot of conversations I'm reading about like video games as art and as the new medium of storytelling, and like games like that make me really go all in on that of like, this is as much of a like, you know, good writing medium instead of just like it has to be action packed or it has to be like whatever else, good level design. Like storytelling is becoming more and more involved within video games, and I like that direction in those genres. And then as far as shows, BoJack Horseman, I just finished the new episodes that had come out, which is the first half of the last season, and it's as good as ever. I love BoJack Horseman. I was BoJack Horseman for Halloween at work, and yeah, it's great. I'm trying to figure out who will get a happy ending, if anybody, or if any of them actually deserves it.
Oh shit!
But it left on quite a big cliffhanger on the last episode, and so I'm excited for the final 8. I think there's going to be 8 more episodes, so I think it'll end out strong. Every season's been amazing, so if you haven't watched BoJack, it's time. Everybody
I saw that
at this table.
I've watched some of it.
I'm talking all of it. All of it.
I don't need to spiral.
Tuca and
any more
Birdie.
than
Let's
I
watch Tuca and
already
Birdie.
am.
I'll watch that. We had a previous
I can
recommendation
do that.
Oh, I've heard
from
about
Andrew a few
I've heard
episodes
about
ago.
that.
Yeah, he brought it up when he was on the Bluebeard episodes. But anyway, that's the recent media. And with that means we're going to be handing it over to Danny for her second choice of the podcast. Take it away.
Hey, yeah, I chose this book because I read White Teeth, also by Zadie Smith, a few years ago, and I thought it was interesting, but it was kind of hard for me to follow, so I wanted to try again with her writing, because I know that she's pretty celebrated and a lot of people like her. So essentially the story follows 4 people throughout a part of northwest London, and it starts, I think it's divided into 4 parts. The first part focuses on a character named Leah, who is approached by a woman at her house, who basically scams her into giving her money. And Leah kind of like spirals into kind of like an existential, not crisis, but she just gets a little bit in her head about this woman, and she like finds her again. And among other things, she describes a relationship with her husband, and then also her friend and her friend's husband. And all around, Leah's attitude is just, I don't know, like I came away from the first chapter feeling just like bummed. And
yeah, she's very like kind of just like floating through life, and
she's floating, and she like has, I mean, we'll get into it, but like she just doesn't, I mean, she's not happy. She seems very just like she's in a rut, and this like getting scammed actually kind of brings a lot out. It feels like an impetus for a lot of things. And then the second chapter, the first chapter is called Visitation, and the second is called Guest. And it follows a man named Felix. He's dating a woman named Grace, and he essentially like goes and among other things visits, I believe it's like an ex-girlfriend or this woman that he has slept with on and off for a while. And he goes to like break things off with her, or at least he tries. And you kind of with the intention of turning over a new leaf with Grace, his girlfriend. And on his way home back to Grace's apartment, he gets mugged and then murdered. And
yeah, brutal way to end our section.
Yeah, I mean, it was very like
last page.
Yeah, like the last page.
It's like half a page, and it's just so some brutal bummer chapters.
And it also escalated so quickly. It was like, I got punched. Wait.
And then he got stabbed.
Yeah.
Or he like thought the stab was a punch.
It's just like, it's not so bad. Oh, I'm
Like,
and it just is.
I'm dying. Oblivion.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It was very fast and like very shocking. Especially because a running theme throughout the first 2 sections is what is it? Carnival is happening. And everybody is taught like people are stopping Felix in the street. Like friends are talking about it with Leah, and her friends are talking about it. Like they're all talking about the weekend and the party and like the parties they're going to go to and the plans they have. And so we were very set up for disappointment when he gets killed, because he never makes it to Carnival with his girlfriend or her friends. So yeah, that's the first half. That's the first 2 sections. I want to start with Leah. I want to start by talking about Leah and her relationship with her husband. She in the first section, she, among all of these other activities that are happening, she finds out that she's pregnant, and then she gets an abortion, and she doesn't tell her husband, right? She doesn't tell him anything. So what do you guys think? Why do you guys think that she didn't tell her husband about being pregnant and getting the abortion?
I mean, I think so much of their marriage is built on a falsehood or just like a miscommunication. Like they got married so quickly and without knowing each other. Like she says at some point that they weren't friends until after they got married.
Yeah.
And like a lot of things happened very quickly. And there was also a detail that kept like just like stuck in my head was that they had anal sex before they had actual sex. Like their relationship was just weird. They didn't have those conversations at all. I don't know why that stuck in my brain. Like she listed a bunch of things right in the middle discussing their relationship, and that stuck in my brain being like, wow, that's oof. Oof. But I think that they got married and she loves him in a very passionate way, but not in a realistic way. And I feel like, from what it sounds like, they never really had a discussion about children. It was just kind of that he assumed they would have kids if they're going to get married. And she doesn't want to let him down and say that she doesn't want that, because it's clear that she doesn't want children.
Yeah.
She's had more than one abortion. At least one of them he knows about. Like, it was like right when they first started dating. But I think that it's just a lot of denial of, I got into a marriage where we want different things, but I still love him and I don't want to acknowledge that. So it's easier for him to think that we have fertility issues than it is for me to have that conversation of, I don't want to have a child.
Yeah. And I also think, just from the fact that she had talked about the fear of change, that despite the problems that are apparent in their relationship, she does enjoy the physical attraction, and obviously getting pregnant would affect that. Even in the short term of her being pregnant, would affect something that may be the arguably best part of their marriage, just from what we've seen about their ability to communicate in certain instances where, like, he's having these conversations with her mom about, like, her flaws, you know, just different things like that, that, like, their communication skills might not be the best. Like in the case where she let the scam artist come into the apartment. They had that conversation. She's just sitting there like, okay, like, you're talking about me right now.
Her mom and her husband just, like, ganged up on her. And they both just, like shit on her and about her. Like and told her she was an idiot for, like, letting this person in. And Leah was, she stood up for herself in her head, like, so we read about it, but like, she was like, oh, like, she thought it was legitimate, or maybe she just wanted to help or whatever. She had reasons, but they just, like, ganged up on her. And
so I think that, like, that's part of it, is that, you know, where the communication issues may be, the pregnancy may be something that would sabotage the thing that she values the most, or maybe clinging on to within their relationship. And so that would be a factor. And then also, just because from what, you know, we've seen a little bit now, just the juxtaposition, because Jamie told me on the back that shows what other characters that we follow, we are also going to see from the perspective of Natalie, her friend. And it also, like, talked about the kind of differences of their social classes at this point. And so, like, that may also be a difficulty, just because, like, she's already been set up as some juxtaposition of, like, their wealthier lifestyle. And that may be difficult for their family to have children as well. I don't know how much that's explored too.
They have a child, right?
Natalie?
Yeah.
I'm saying Leah.
Leah.
Yeah,
okay.
but, like, that may be kind of an issue too.
Oh, like, they don't have as much money, so it's harder.
Yeah, and so that could be a factor too. I don't know if it was explained as much, but also, like, she did have thoughts of, you know, comparing herself to somebody who she grew up with and now has such a wide gap between the two of them. Like, that kind of highlights of, you know, seeing her take care of children in her circumstances and kind of the circumstances that they're in too. So
yeah, it was interesting to see her. I don't remember if she knew she was pregnant when they went over to their house. Like, they went over to Natalie, and
she did, I think.
So, so she's very kind of disdainful in her own mind about, like, the kids, and, like, just the way even that she describes the parents, like, responding to every, like, to the kids, like, every beck and call. And, like, she just is a little disdainful, but also it feels a little wistful too. Like, she hates it, but also doesn't she hates, like, the way that they're acting around their kids, and, like, she seems to not love the kids, but also, like, is pregnant and, like, also wishing that she wasn't. I don't know. It was, like, a very interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see. I would think that we may get more of an outside perspective from Natalie.
That's what I think is happening, but also I'm confused because Felix isn't listed on the back.
Is he not?
No, it says Leah, Natalie, Fox, and Nathan.
Oh, that's
is Fox Felix?
Wait, that's a misprint. Mine says Felix.
Oh.
Oh, interesting.
That's very weird.
Well, that's just what I had assumed. But regardless, because Natalie has that connection, they obviously spend a lot of time together.
Yeah.
I would assume it gets brought up from Natalie's perspective when she sees Leah later on.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see like what she thinks about them not getting pregnant, if she's aware, because I don't recall that they ever had those conversations. Every time Leah's taken contraceptive, it's been secretive.
Secretly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she's also hiding her birth control, which
Yeah. And also is like stealing.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. She was also potentially stealing from Natalie.
Yeah, she said that she took it
that's
out of
right.
Natalie's
So that
power.
may be another factor that it gets brought up, that like I would assume Natalie would realize it's
that
getting
it's missing.
taken, and
Yeah.
like
yeah,
it would
you
be
should.
easy to like
Unless
piece it
it's
together.
like old and they were trying to have
Well,
a
she
kid
can
at
only
the
keep up
time,
that
or-
ruse for so long then, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No,
so
yeah,
so
yeah.
like I don't know, it'll just be interesting to see like from her perspective on it too, just because they have that. But I found that like that was kind of maybe part of the factor, but I think it is like in Leah's mind there's a lot there, but as to why she doesn't want to have the kids, but I feel like those are a few of the main ones.
Why do you think she's so affected by this, like this woman? What's her name? Shar.
Yeah, Shar.
She, I mean, like the scamming actually like happens very quickly, and it even took me a little while to like realize what was actually going on.
Yeah. I didn't-
Because it just like it happens, and it happens early in the book. It's like one of the first things we see, one of the first like events that that happens in the book, and so I don't know. I thought it was interesting that she starts obsessing a little bit, or she just like thinks about it a lot. Like, why do you guys think that she was so, I don't know, interested in Shar, or like she seemed to like she kind of seemed to be upended by the whole situation.
I feel like it has a lot to do with how everybody else in her life reacted.
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, they obviously like need money, and she did give the woman like a lot of money. But I have a feeling that if she lived alone and if she didn't tell anybody about it, she probably would have just been like, oh, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in her mind, giving in to the fact that she was scammed and like giving up on it points out a lot of the flaws that like her husband and her mother point out all the time anyway. And she's just like insecure about it. But I don't know. I don't know.
I think some of it just relating it to like personal experiences that we've had is that like we've had our car broken into here, and that kind of affects your mindset a little bit because it's happening so close to your own home and happening within your community. Because like when that happened to us, it was something that like we felt on edge for a little bit.
It feels very violating.
And so I think that like, you know, we hear about the fact that she, in describing her childhood, like brings up how close she lived in childhood. Like she looks up at the window and it's like, I came from here to here. Like this is her neighborhood. She's been there forever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if something like this has ever happened before. I would assume by her susceptibility to it that maybe it hasn't. And I feel like if this is the place that she's always grown up in, and this was like the first instance of her getting essentially robbed, regardless of how you describe it, within her own community, because it's happening in her own home, it's happening in her own building close to where she grew up. Like I feel like that would be a pretty jarring experience to just all of a sudden be like, oh, it's like, you know, if she felt some solitude in her home area, that kind of puts a pin in that a little bit.
Yeah, and on top of that too, Char is like someone that she kind of knows. Like they went to high school.
They went to high school together.
Yeah.
So
so
that could feel very betraying for like the neighborhood, trying to protect people who you see as like, not like family is too close of a word, but like she's very community oriented. She likes her neighborhood and feels connected to it.
Yeah, and even from that perspective of like, we already see how much it affects her to see like where Natalie has come from their point in time. That's in like an upward socioeconomic trajectory, and in Char's case is in a downward socioeconomic trajectory. Like that can also be pretty jarring to see like the full range of what has happened from like their graduating class presumably to like get robbed by somebody who's like,
that's interesting too, is that like we met those people pretty close together. So like here's two people she went to high school with. She maybe feels like, you know, not as good as Natalie, but then like the Char thing happens and she realizes they went to high school together. So she feels like she's more in the middle of the two of them, like
and it's uncomfortable.
And also like she's probably closer to Char's situation than she is to Natalie's,
which I'm sure
Natalie
like,
seems very wealthy.
Yeah, she lives in a freaking. Didn't they describe it as a mansion, maybe, or something like I don't know, like something similar to that?
I think it was kind of a townhome, but like a really big one.
And I would assume in the city, in close quarters, like a townhome is a mansion, is mansion-esque. Like
it's not an apartment. It has more than one floor.
Yeah.
Like, for sure.
So I think that like I said, just from experiencing that too, just having your community betray you.
Kind of like she even does she seek her out again, or does she run into her?
She runs into her a couple times.
She almost didn't want to say it, I think, right? When she first saw her, like Michelle wanted to know, and she kind of was like, I don't know if I'm going to say something. I think so, right?
Yeah.
So I don't even think that she wanted to confront it at first, because then it becomes like, when she continues to see her later on, I think one of the interactions, she's like, I started feeling what Michelle felt. Like she starts embodying his reaction to it. So I don't know that she wanted to even confront it.
She still feels bad for Char because she runs into her. I don't remember if it's once or twice, like just in the streets, and kind of says something to her. But then also she puts pamphlets in her door.
Oh, that's right.
Like for rehab and stuff.
Then doesn't she see her again? And Char's like, I don't need.
Yeah, like I don't need your help.
Don't do that. Like, don't invade my space like that. Like, I don't need your help. Like, you don't know. And I think also like that made me think that, I mean, Leah was like very much trying to almost like prove her mom and Michelle wrong. Like maybe I got scammed, but it was worth it because I gave her more money and I helped her.
Yeah.
Like she was trying to save face like in her own family. And that felt like that made me feel just like terrible for her because she like was trying really hard to make this thing worth it. But like it was mostly because like her, like, you know, her mom and her husband were not on her side and like they just weren't supportive. They were harsh. They were mean, like in this thing that like made her feel very vulnerable.
Yeah, and she was like trying.
They like
to do
scolded
a good
her.
Thing. Like she had good intentions for the most part. I think also some of her intention was just like, I want this woman out of my apartment. Like,
well, yeah,
but like she tried to do the right thing. So that's upsetting.
Yeah. What, if anything, like, what do you make of her relationship with her mom? It kind of was all explained when, like, in the very beginning when, like, Pauline, her name's Pauline, and Michelle are, like, just ganging up on her and scolding her. But the way, I also wanted to talk about this, the way that Zadie Smith writes Leah's chapter versus Felix's, like, the actual design and, like, structure and, like, the way the sentences are laid out on the page is very, I think it's very effective for Leah. Like, there are times when she puts more space, like, extra spaces between words. A lot of times she writes it so that, like, the narration is happening in, like, just regular single space, and then if she wants to like interject with, you know, there's like Leah's thoughts in the single space, and then like in tiny half-spaced paragraphs in between is like her mom's
lines.
running commentary.
Yeah.
But she also, like, there's some like poetry at the beginning, and it just is like, I really enjoyed it takes a little getting used to, but I did really enjoy like Leah's chapter, especially because I think it just like, it was a very illustrative chapter. You can hear the space between the words. It almost reads like a play at some points. Like, I just thought it was really effective, and I really enjoyed it. And so during the chat, like the part where she's with her mom, I think they're going shopping or something, and Leah's just like narration in her head is just normal, is written normally, and then her mom's just like running commentary about the weather and just like very mundane things that are happening just are interjected in the middle of all of Leah's thoughts, so she's only really half paying attention to. And her mom she just strikes me as like kind of a character who doesn't like, she surface level cares about her daughter, but I don't, or maybe she has good intentions, but she just is like, well, you and Michelle have like, you know, you're gonna have your issues, but just try harder and work them out. And she just seemed pretty insincere, and it was frustrating for me.
About trying to like steer Leah into the thing she wanted, which was kids. Or she wanted grandkids, I guess, in her case. I'd say that like that's definitely a factor, and it is kind of interesting with that structure too. And in talking about that, I think that, as you were mentioning, I hadn't thought of it that way, but like indicative of Leah's engagement with her conversations with people around her. She is kind of stuck in her own head, and I think that it does do a good job of highlighting that. And I had read the comparison, which this happens all the time, just because there's a few writers that everyone's like, oh, it's very blanky, but in the structure, it was very Joycean in the way it's written, the dash lines of the speech, and then everything else that's going on kind of flowing in and out of different ideas. You know, the stream of consciousness when it's not exactly in the conversations that are going on, but also the structure of the conversations themselves, with, instead of quotation marks, it's the dash lines. Like, that's a technique that I'm trying to find the originator of who did that. I know the earliest I found is James Joyce doing those dashes within speech. But I think that it is interesting because in Felix's chapter, I don't think there was any structure.
No, it was very normal.
And all of the conversations didn't really get that deep into Felix's thought process like that. Like, you still got the internal thoughts, but not in such a way where it was...
It was much more conversational, and just like, there were like 4 things that happened in that chapter, and it just went from...
driving him forward
to event.
Yeah,
because his was kind of Felix's section that stood out to me was that a lot of paragraphs were not indented, but then some were, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Like, it would definitely be on a different line, but not indented, and then sometimes it would be on a different line and indented, and I never understood the purpose of that. But also, genuinely, until you said anything about it, I took like kind of a big break not a big break, but a break in between reading the sections, like a week long, after I finished Leah's section and picked up Felix's. And so I had forgotten, like, my brain did not recognize that the style was different.
Oh, yeah.
But also I knew that I enjoyed Felix's section less. And I now realize that I think it's because of the style. Like, I liked his story. I thought the story was good and interesting, and the characters were interesting, but I enjoyed reading it less. And I think it's because I liked the style a lot of the first section. And it felt quick and easy to read because the chapters were quick, and like the structure flowed really easily for me. And I was super interested in, speaking of structure also, the few chapters that were named 37. She had like this weird obsession with the number 37 that I thought was really interesting. But I hadn't noticed that. I hadn't acknowledged it, at least.
Yeah, I did definitely miss the style in what you were saying of Leah's chapters more. I generally like playing with the structural, or when authors play with the structural style of traditional novels, and it was such a stark difference between the two.
It reminded me of Lincoln and the Bardo.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in terms of a different kind of structure. And actually, I was reading an article on, I was looking up earlier, bookmovement.com. It looks a little bit like Goodreads. And like we were chatting before we started recording about just like general like distaste for this book. Like somebody on Goodreads like legitimately reviewed it and said she was disgusted by this book, and we were just pondering why somebody could feel disgusted. Maybe that'll come in the last two chapters, but one person mentioned that they were unable to determine the plot or the purpose of book after reading 12 chapters, so they gave up. And I think that kind of thing is like when you don't recognize the structure, when it's like unfamiliar and confusing, or maybe a little confusing to you, I can imagine that it would be hard to get through. But also, I mean, sometimes you have to like, I had to read the first few chapters a few times, like they were short, and just to like soak it all in, like, I don't know. And also, Zadie Smith has I think it's in the New Yorker, she recorded a video, where she just reads the first chapter out loud, and it's actually like really interesting to hear her, because it's her direct idea of like what the flow is supposed to be like, and listening to the way she phrases everything is really helpful. Like if I had watched that before I started reading, I feel like it would just have been, it's very informative. Like it just informs the way that she wrote that section in particular, that chapter in particular, or that part in particular. And so anyway, if you're interested, it's there she recorded a just like the first chapter, and it was really effective. It sounded a lot like she was reading poetry, and I really enjoyed that too. The first section felt very poetic to me. Okay, let's move on to Felix. I kind of left Felix's chapter wondering, like, he spends a lot of time at his dad's place at the beginning, and I wondered why that was significant. Why was it necessary? He spent, I mean, like, there were a lot of pages about his time at his dad's, almost like as many as there were of him at his, like, not girlfriend's place. Yeah. And I just was curious, like, why that was like emphasized so much.
I mean, I feel like Felix, as a whole character, as a chapter, as a section, I assume we won't see anything else from him because he's dead.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of his section is kind of grounding some of the ideas that have already been put in place about the neighborhood and the community, and like the generational effects or like influence throughout the community. So I think that being at his dad's house and talking about that book, the photographic book about the neighborhood, is more grounding the setting than anything else.
Yeah, I felt that way too.
And like I think generational relationships seem very important in it, either in this book or in that neighborhood specifically. Like it seems like a very specific subset of society that like stays there always, and their parents lived there, and they have like a pride kind of, even though there are a lot of issues in the community. So I think that focusing on his father and his life, how he met Felix's mother, and the I don't remember what they call it, but like that halfway house kind of place that he lived in with the priest that wasn't a priest but a social worker, but I don't know. I think that that's the purpose of that section, because I think that a lot of Felix, like, it's we're going to hear more about those things in later chapters, but without Felix.
Yeah, it definitely felt like it was setting the stage a little bit. Like it felt like an explanation of the setting, more than anything. Especially because that chapter as a whole felt like it could have just been its own little book about Felix.
Yeah,
like it could have just been a short story. And I'm really interested to see what she does, how she connects it. I also feel, maybe I just read this somewhere. I feel like Felix isn't totally gone. I feel like we find something else out. Maybe about
I feel like maybe Grace will come back up or something.
Yeah, just the fact that we didn't really see her.
Yeah.
And there has already been crossover of characters, supposedly. I mean, we know that Natalie's coming up, but like the fact that Grace is still involved in the community, and also with Lloyd, is that his father's name?
Yeah.
Like he'll still be involved too. Like that might be an important factor to like carry over his part of the story to the rest of the novel. Just having him involved to at least bring it up, or like flashbacks with him, because we already have characters established. But
I think that also, I asked Brian this after I finished, and I didn't look back because I don't remember when it was mentioned in Leah's section, but I think that that was already mentioned. Like, Leah and Michelle were talking about a mugging that happened on a certain street, like that day when they were talking. It was like a news piece, and it was very briefly mentioned, but I specifically remember something being like, oh, well, he didn't even have a gun. Like, that was a stabbing or something. Like, very briefly mentioned. So I think that will probably come back up, because I think that
presumably will be a big deal during this carnival.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be a big news thing.
I think that they know about it already.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
And it will be interesting because, like, it is such a packaged point in time. Excuse me, in comparison to Leah's chapter. We don't know, like, if it happened before or after whatever happened with hers, because hers was a long timeline, and Felix's chapter was literally, like, point A to point B.
Well, I think that's why Carnival is mentioned, is because that's giving
to
us
ground
kind
it,
of like
that it's still
timeline.
in the same. But I'm saying, as far as like what their events within that time period and where his fit into that, because it could have been anywhere in the middle of what already happened with them, because it was such an isolated, like a series of events, I suppose, from the car sale to everything else that happened to him getting stabbed. So it may be another factor that affects Leah in a later chapter, continuing on how her interaction with Shar and the crime kind of threw her for a loop a little bit. Like, this could just be adding on to her feeling of discomfort with the neighborhood, because that's, presuming that that's what we're getting is their characters and their interactions with where they live. It's the title of the book, Northwest. I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out for the rest of the characters moving forward as well.
Oh, I found it. Oh, yes. It literally names Felix.
Page?
Page 104. I just happened to flip to it because Michelle, it says, Albert Road, shouts Michelle from the kitchen. Leah shouts back, yeah, but it's got nothing to do with Carnival. It was last night. It's just, Michelle walks through the door. It's just typical sensational reporting. They want to be there. Leah, can I hear it, please? The television says. The young man, named locally as Felix Cooper, was 32 years old. He grew up in the notorious Garvey House project in Holloway, but had moved with his family to this relatively quiet corner of Kilburn.
I wasn't even thinking about it. I feel like I was in a totally different headspace reading this.
Yeah.
I remembered
I
it being mentioned.
Remember it. I didn't remember it.
I feel like I remember them talking about a crime, but I didn't remember that it was Felix.
I didn't remember that his name was mentioned. I just remembered that they noted a specific mugging. Mm-hmm. And so when his came up, I was like, oh, that's probably the same thing they were talking about.
Yeah.
But it does mention his name.
And then Michelle, cool. A little frustratingly, like, again, tries to make a case for, like, moving out. Like, it's just like, oh, the mugging or the scamming with Shar, and then he just, like, hears about a random mugging and is just like, we have to
we gotta
move.
go. It's time.
And it's like, like, don't. He was being such a dick. Yeah, I don't know. Michelle was bothering me.
Michelle.
Have either of you read Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Yes.
Both of you?
Yes.
Great. I was the last one to read it. The scene where Felix goes up and talks to Grace, not Grace, talks to, what's her name?
What is her name?
Annie.
Annie sounds right to me.
That scene where he's in her apartment and she's just like floating around. It is Annie. Floating around and just like doing whatever and like drinking during the day reminded me so hard of the narrator's experience with Holly in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah, I
Like,
can see that.
It really, I mean, like they're in an, I don't know. It just like they're in an apartment and like he's just like following her around. He follows her up to the roof. He's making her a drink. He's kind of just like, he feels a little more sure of himself like in the first part of the chapter. And then he kind of just turns into like a puppy who's just like doing her bidding like during this chapter, and is just, I mean, she's just kind of like, I could just imagine her like with a feather boa and a cigarette just being like, get me a drink, darling. Like, I don't know.
Your problems aren't mine.
Yeah, I don't know. And then she was just kind of a smart ass, and it just reminded me of the entirety of Breakfast at Tiffany's.
I agree with that, except that I feel like it was much grosser. Like, Breakfast at Tiffany's, I still, and like it's been a very long time since I've read it, but I still see it as kind of like she's very glamorous, or like tries to be glamorous.
This is like a trashy version.
Yeah, like Annie is gross,
and she like lives like above like a brothel.
Yeah, and like the way he described like her caked on makeup in like the very first moment when he arrives.
What's a less glamorous?
It's like a
jewelry store.
Claire's.
Yeah, Breakfast at Claire's was this section. It was a nice Breakfast at Claire's.
Sponsored by.
Yeah. That was the alt title for Felix's section, was Breakfast at Claire's.
I very much agree with that. It was Breakfast at Tiffany's without any of the glamour and class.
Yeah. Just lots of like Coke on the floor.
Yeah, like a trashy.
She's clean though, dude.
Party.
No.
Except for Coke.
Except for,
She's like, I'm sober, and he's like, except for all the drinking and Coke.
She's like, well, I'm not a nun, or something like that.
I'm not a nun. I liked that part. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't love her, but I did enjoy that part. It felt to me like that was the most important part of the chapter. Like, even though like his time with Lloyd lasted kind of a long time, I was just like, oh, like this is what he was going to do. And then, it
was a bummer, even though he went back on what he came there to do. It did seem like
they do have sex.
I was very disappointed.
But
I was too.
But it does seem like he was ready to turn the leaf, regardless of not doing it.
He was
then,
like, okay, this is the last time.
But like it did feel like he was committed, even though he slipped. Like it felt like it was in good intention. So that was what made it even worse when he.
Did anybody else feel like he was about to murder her before he left? Because that's where I thought it was going.
I don't think.
What gave you that impression?
He says something.
Oh, does he say? Are you gonna prove to us again that he?
I just flipped to it.
Actually, it says that
I'm
he
gonna kill her.
No, he literally says something about like, I want her dead.
Oh no.
He's like, it's not that I just don't want to see her ever again. It's I want her to not be alive. And I thought he was gonna turn around and murder her, and then he was gonna go to jail. Like, that's what I need to find where he says that. It's right before he leaves.
It was interesting to me that he spent a lot of energy like kind of shitting on her. And she was like, dude, I'm happy with my life.
Found it.
Like, she was like, I don't know. He was kind of being a dick in that way. He was like insulting her and like mad at her and like taking out his anger on her. And she was like, you're sleeping with me. Like, you don't have to. Like,
yeah.
I'm not saying he's perfect. I just think he was on the road
that
too.
Totally was not.
I'm just as a clarification. Not that he came in as an angel of like, I'm being seduced.
I mean, yeah, he was like, he was like, I mean, he was mad at himself, obviously, for like continuing to see her or whatever.
Given enough time, I'm assuming he would have.
Oh, I agree with that.
Done the right thing.
But he just was so judgmental.
And not killed her, maybe.
Okay, listen to this language, though. On page 187, his narration says, in the hall between the bedroom and lounge, Felix turned round and grabbed both her wrists. He was shaking. He hadn't realized till now what he wanted. Not just that she lose, but that she not exist.
Yeah.
Like, he was shaking and grabbing her wrist forcefully, and I was like, he's about to murder this woman right after they had passionate sex on the roof.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I actually, like...
Not great timing.
He was so disgusted with himself that I would have not been surprised.
I think that's what my thought was, is he
Yeah.
is so upset right now, and he thought he had turned a new leaf, and then suddenly he was, like,
Ruins
eating her
it
out.
himself.
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
wants to, like, lose every proof, like, of that.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't. I'm glad he didn't murder her, but I really, for, like, 2 pages, I was like, he's about to kill this woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That was really interesting to me.
But then he dies, so sorry, Felix.
Bye, Felix. What do you...
Bye, Felix.
That wasn't intentional.
Just brushes.
Bye.
Bye.
Do you have predictions for the next 2 sections?
I think everybody's gonna be sad. The world is sad. Natalie's probably sad in her marriage. Nathan is the other character, who is the guy that we met in the subway,
Yep,
and
we have
I'm
met
positive he's sad.
He's for sure sad. He
Um,
was like living on the streets, right?
Yeah, like selling bootleg.
But he seemed nice. He was like, "Hi, Mrs. H."
To be
right?
fair,
H,
we
last
met
name.
I think
we
so.
met him very briefly, but he seemed like one of the happier characters in the book.
Despite having a worse
Valid.
situation.
Yes, despite yeah.
But that's my
Maybe
thought.
that's the commentary.
Is that everyone's
higher you go, the worse it gets.
sad.
Or you die.
Do you have a prediction? Do you have a prediction?
As I had mentioned earlier, I think we'll get a little bit more into Leah's story and not have it with any bias from her own perspective.
Yeah.
I think that will be exciting. I mean, it's almost assured that we're going to get that, but I'm just curious to see if it's going to paint her in a better light, in a worse light. Obviously, there's some perceived strain from Leah's perspective between her and Natalie, but I'm curious to see what Natalie thinks about their relationship. Maybe her distance has nothing to do with Leah, and maybe it does have to do with her marriage or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was a description at some point in Leah's section where, like, they were all at a party and Natalie's husband walks in and they look at each other like
say
they hate each
nothing,
other.
yeah.
Yeah, like, it's just like,
Yeah. So that's what I'm excited to hear about that. And with Nathan, just, what we had just said, maybe he is like the happiest character out of anybody, but I think it will also be interesting because for, where Felix was socioeconomically, like potentially Nathan will be the lowest rung on the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will be an interesting perspective for this section of London. And like, this is all really fascinating to me because I don't really have that much of a finger on the pulse of like much of London, except for like the vast, like media
I'm the
or
only one who's been there.
like media
true.
or sports, like I know all of that, but as far as like the actual,
all of the media,
all
and
of the media,
sports for
all
London.
of the sports, London, I'm nailing that. But as far as like the actual inner workings of the city, it'll be interesting to just get that perspective, and that's why I've liked the book so far, just to experience that from less of a filtered perspective.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really descriptive profile of like a place that like we wouldn't be able to know these things even if we like went and visited.
Yeah.
Like it's really interesting to read it in like a fictional setting, but also like this place is real
And she grew up in Northwest
Yeah.
London from what I read, so like it presumably has some truth to
Mm-hmm.
it. So I've been really enjoying it, and I'm just kind of predicting, what we kind of talked about, and I'm excited to see what those perspectives bring.
Yeah, I think that there might be more like integration of the characters and their stories than there has been.
Yeah.
I think that the last 2 sections will integrate the the first two much more than the first two did with each other. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. I fail to see why anyone would be disgusted with this book.
Yeah, what's I mean, I guess like
maybe the tampon teeth thing.
Do you want to explain that? Tampon teeth isn't very descriptive.
I feel like if you read it, you know what I'm talking about.
Just throwing in tampon teeth at the end of the episode.
Yeah, it felt like it. We hadn't talked about it yet, so.
And now it's been talked about.
Yeah.
Check.
Cool, thanks, bye.
That's all.
Yeah, that'll be next episode will be the second half of Northwest. I think I didn't read anything about it, but in looking up stuff on the book, I think there are actually 3 more sections. So I don't know what that actually ends up being. So like I said, no spoilers, but apparently there are 5. So I don't know what that will entail, because as far as I know from the back, there's 4 characters. Maybe there's some unifying thing at the end, but we'll get the last 3 sections, and that'll be the last book of season 1, dude.
Season 1, dude.
Holy cow, dude. And then we'll also bring up the giveaway rules. Maybe you'll get Northwest.
Stay tuned.
Raise your hand if you're trying to get Northwest out there, people.
Let us know.
So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. Great choice, Danny, so far. We'll see if we feel the same way.
That was so threatening.
We'll see if we feel the same way next week. But yeah, we will catch you next time. Are we still scatting?
Jamie, it's your turn.
A Scooby-Doo, up a Shooby-Doo.
This is very classic Jamie's scat.
Boo!
Boo!
Boo! We'll catch you next time.
Bye.